This seminar comes at a particularly timely moment, right? As we know, earlier this week, President Lee visited Singapore. He held a summit with Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, and it was a meeting that not only reaffirmed bilateral ties, but also took place against the backdrop of global and regional uncertainty. And beyond issues specific to bilateral relations, Singapore also recognizes that developments on the peninsula have broader implications for regional stability. And it is therefore fitting, I think, that we turn our attention today to these evolving dynamics. We are privileged today to have with us Professor Chung-in to share with us his insights on the topic. Please allow me to briefly introduce Professor Moon. He is the S.T. Lee Distinguished Speaker at RSIS, and he has had a long and accomplished career in both academia and in policy. Professor Moon is the James Laney Distinguished Professor at Yonsei University, the Vice Chairman of the Asia-Pacific Leadership Network, the Krauss Distinguished Fellow at the School of Global Policy and Strategy at the University of California, as well as the Editor-in-Chief of Global Asia. Professor Moon was also a Special Advisor to the ROK President for Foreign Affairs and National Security from 2017 to 2021, and he has served as the Ambassador for International Security Affairs of the Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and Chairman of the Presidential Committee on Northeast Asian Cooperation Initiative. He was a special delegate to the first, second, and third Inter-Korean summits. So today, Professor Moon will speak for about 30 to 40 minutes, following which we will go into Q&A. So Professor, the floor is yours.
Sarah, thank you very much for your very kind introduction. And I was, planning to use a PPT, but given the size of audience, if I use a PPT, it will disrupt the spontaneity of my presentation. Therefore, I decided not to use a PPT. But you can have a reference of PPT through the RSIS, okay? And also, I would like to express my appreciation to Cindy Ko. She has been superb coordinator of this program. And I'm very honored to be invited here as a guest speaker of your school, and particularly Ambassador Ong. Thank you very much for arranging such an opportunity. And I'm very honored that our president and former ambassador, president here, Ambassador Hong and Ambassador Choi, they are very kind enough to be here. And also I have some familiar faces here, but I won't mention their names. And it is very, fortunate for me to be here because, President Jae-Myung visited Singapore, and his visit was extremely successful. And, he learned a very important lesson from Singapore for South Korea. There is a whole issue of how to deal with the real estate problem, okay? And he was spreading words about, Singaporean model of real estate management. And I think that will continue to be a big political issue in South Korea. And apart from that, his meeting with President Taruman went very well, and also his meeting with Prime Minister Wong went very well. And then we have decided to come up with so-called strategic cooperative partnership between Singapore and Republic of Korea. And I see very, very good sign. And also President Jae-Myung has been trying to promote the idea of a coalition of middle powers, and Singapore could be a very ideal candidate for the middle power, particularly in terms of soft power, okay, and not in terms of size, but in terms of your, soft power. Singapore has a lot of innovative ideas in facilitating international cooperation and promoting global governance. And I think, given President Jae-Myung's smartness, I think he may come up with some innovative ideas on how to cooperate with Singapore in that regard. Therefore, that's a very positive sign. And also, other than that, there was very concrete progress in such areas as artificial intelligence, shipbuilding, and defense industry, and etc. And given Jae-Myung's style, then he will come up with a very concrete result. And why don't we give a big applause to Ambassador Hong? He worked very hard to make that happen. Anyhow. As you know that South Korea went really in a great inflection point in the contemporary history. December 3rd, 2024, then President Yoon Suk-yeol initiated so-called martial law or palace coup that failed, and that brought about the major political transformation in South Korea. And June last year, there was a presidential election. Jae-Myung, a candidate from the Democratic Party of Korea, won the election, and then we have a new so-called Jae-Myung government, or it is called the government of people's sovereignty, and if he has come up with a lot of new ideas, and he's very popular in Korea, and almost 62% approval rate from the people. That's quite unprecedented, and given very hostile environments at home and abroad. Therefore, he has been doing quite well, and the approval rate of ruling party is about 46-47%, but approval rate of President Jae-Myung exceeds 60%. Therefore, he is a very popular president, and he's doing quite well. But he has encountered, really numerous challenges at home and abroad. Okay, and as you can see, that the Korean stock market showed a roller coaster effect. It went down 13% and came back with 8% today, and therefore the economy is very volatile. But more pressing issue is in the security. President Jae-Myung is very well aware of so-called Korea risk and Korea premium. He believes that peace is the best Korean premium. War, conflict is worst Korea risk. Okay, therefore, him, the ultimate task is how to avoid war on the Korean Peninsula and bring peace to the Korean Peninsula, so that he can enhance Korean premium. For him, peace is an essential prerequisite for prosperity, okay, and people's life. That is his.
I think the microphone is not right.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ambassador. I think I should take a distance. And then what kinds of security challenges he's facing? I think there's numerous, but I would come up with 4 in the challenges. First challenge is threat coming from North Korea. Okay, there could be vacancy of the Yoon Suk-yeol government. Yoon Suk-yeol government pursued the policy of force to force, peace through strength, and he was emphasizing the importance of preemptive strike on North Korea, okay, preemption doctrine, departing from old defensive deterrence doctrine. And that really agitated North Korea. And Kim Jong-un of North Korea adopted a very similar policy, force to force, okay? Just getting away from the defensive deterrence. He's now talking about preemption doctrine, okay? And therefore, inter-Korean relations get worsened. And particularly, he adopted the doctrine of so-called hostile two-state relations. He argues that now South Korea is not part of North Korean people. We are 2 different people, 2 different states. And he has been arguing that no intention of reconciliation and unification on the Korean Peninsula. There was really a revolutionary change on the part of North Korea. As part of that kind of very hostile policy, North Korea changed terms of interactions with South Korea. He's cut off the old communication channels. Okay, we used to maintain summit hotline. We used to maintain intelligence agency hotline. And also we used to maintain 3 military hotlines, West Sea, East Sea, and demilitarization. And also our Ministry of Unification used to maintain administrative hotline in Panmunjom. North Korea just cut them off. Okay, therefore no communication at all. And both North and South, in fact it was a Yoon Suk-yeol government which scrapped comprehensive military agreement between the North and the South, okay, by citing the regions of North Korean provocation through the sending of drones to South Korea. Okay, but anyhow, and therefore, the comprehensive military agreement used to serve as a very important tool for confidence-building measures between the North and the South. Now it is gone. Therefore, there is no way of reducing tension and building confidence between the North and the South. And more importantly, whenever there was a period of crisis, South Korean government could have utilized non-governmental, organizations in South Korea which had a connection with North Korea, but they're all gone. North Korea has refused to have any interactions with so-called pro-North Korean NGOs in South Korea, because North Korea got rid of Department of United Front, which deals with those, NGOs dealing with North Korea. And also, when we do not have any domestic resources to open up ties with North Korea, then we used to rely on the United States, so-called the New York Channel, and also Beijing Channel, but neither of them working either. Therefore, not only communication channels have been suspended, but also all these formal and informal networks have been completely cut off. What really makes us worried about is this kind of total incommunicado between the North and the South. That is really worrisome. Therefore now, both North and South Korea are utilizing public media to send information each other. Okay? This is horrible. If anything happened in the West Sea, there is no way to control manage the crisis in the West Sea or demilitarized zone. There is, therefore, the heightened tension on the Korean Peninsula will be the number one challenge to President Lee Jae-Myung. Number two challenge is the North Korean nuclear issue. Okay? North Korea has nuclear facilities, has nuclear materials, both highly enriched uranium and plutonium, and it has produced at least 50 to 120 nuclear bombs. It has all kinds of delivery vehicles, from the short-range, ballistic, and cruiser missile all the way to ICBM. And even North Korea claims that it has developed a submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Okay? And plus, North Korea undertook 6 rounds of nuclear testing, and particularly 6th nuclear testing was extremely successful. Okay? And also, North Korea claimed that it has miniaturized nuclear bombs, so that they can use them for tactical nuclear weapons or have a multiple warhead in ICBM. Okay? And also North Korea has argued that it has diversified nuclear weapons. Therefore, not only just atomic bombs, boosted atomic bombs and hydrogen bombs. And North Korea claims that its 6th nuclear testing was for hydrogen bomb. Given all these things, North Korea has, a nuclear weapons capability. That's a reality. We don't have to recognize it, and we cannot recognize it, because as a member of NPT, we cannot recognize North Korea's nuclear weapons state. But we must aware of North Korea's nuclear weapons capability. And also North Korea has changed its nuclear doctrine too, after the Russian-Ukrainian war. Okay? In the past, North Korea has been very faithful to no first to use doctrine, but now it is changed. Now North Korean leader argues that the nuclear weapons has a second mission. That means what? If North Korean sovereignty and territory are endangered, North Korea is entitled to use nuclear weapons preemptively. And also North Korea claims that it has created 8 companies that deal with tactical nuclear weapons, and they are deployed along the front line. There is no way for us to verify whether there has been deployment of this tactical and nuclear weapons unit along the front line, but that's the reality. Okay? Now, there is a situation, therefore, but we don't have nuclear weapons. International society does not allow to have nuclear weapons. North Korea has nuclear weapons. We are relying on American nuclear umbrella. but there's a growing skepticism on the effectiveness of American nuclear umbrella, or what we call extended nuclear deterrence. Okay? That has posed in a very serious dilemma, particularly in light of what's going on in Iran. Okay? And there's a concern that next might be North Korea. Okay? And that is, I would say, that the second critical challenge to President Lee Jae-Myung. Third challenge is erosion of ROK-US alliance. So far, so good. Both Washington and Seoul argue that the US South Korean alliance tie is very cohesive, very solid. We don't have to worry about it. But devil is in detail. Once you get into deep, then you get to see a lot of cracks in ROK-US alliance system. And particularly American demand. For example, President Trump has been strongly arguing for that South Korea should increase its defense burden from current 2.69% of GDP to 5% of GDP. Okay? And also, United States Trump administration has been arguing that the South Korea should increase its defense co-sharing for American forces stationed in South Korea to up to $10 billion per year. Right now, we are paying about $1 billion. Okay? That's quite a huge sum of money. Another one is particularly Eldridge Colby, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, has made it very clear. South Korea's defense should be done by South Koreans. The particular conventional defense should be done by South Korea. And as part of that framework, the South Korea should allow the United States to pursue the doctrine of strategic flexibility. That means what? U.S. can bring in its forces and bring out its forces freely without consultation with the South Korean government, so that they can deploy American forces in South Korea to South China Sea, Taiwan Strait, or the Gulf area, and whatever. Okay? But that can create quite degree of uncertainty on the Korean Peninsula. Okay? And they can send a very wrong signal to North Korea. We are opposed, but America is still pounding on the application of strategic flexibility. Okay? Another big issue is what? The United States wants South Korean government to come up with a formal and explicit commitment to its military support for American forces in the case of contingencies in the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea. Okay? And therefore, in other words, U.S. While U.S. commitment to South Korea has been underway, while U.S. is wanting us to do more for the U.S., therefore this kind of outsourcing alliance pattern. Okay? And that is very typical President Trump. Trump argues that the South Korea has been free riders a long time. It's time for South Korea to pay back what it gets from the United States. But that kind of alliance arrangement can be very, very precarious for South Koreans. We are worried about it. Final, but not the least, challenge facing President Lee Jae-Myung is China-U.S. strategic rivalry and the South Korean choice. Okay? And Chinese rise, American effort to encircle and contain Chinese rise has become a big issue for South Korea. Okay? And in geopolitical area, United States wants South Korea to be part of American Indo-Pacific strategy, so that South Korea, along with Japan, support the U.S. in containing and encircling China from geopolitical, in the geopolitical arena. And geoeconomic arena, U.S. has been pushing South Korea to pursue decoupling, de-risking, friend-shoring, reshoring, and all these kinds of things. Those pressures are very real, not hypothetical. Okay? And also particularly in technology area, American pressure has been very, very overt, okay, in semiconductor chips, batteries for electrical vehicle, okay, artificial intelligence, and other technology area. United States has been putting a lot of pressure on South Korea to regulate transfer of technology, to limit its investment in China. Okay. And also finally, now it is better, but during the Biden administration, the American government has been pushing very hard on the issue of value. Okay. U.S. wants South Korea to join coalition of the willing, the coalition of democracy, and they want South Korea to come up with big voices regarding Uyghur, Tibet, Hong Kong. And Yoon Suk-yeol government, followed the suit, but Lee Jae-Myung government has been much more cautious. But I think that has become a big issue. There are 4 issues: threat from North Korea nuclear issue, uncertain ROK-U.S. alliance, and finally, agonizing, sandwich the country between China and the United States. I would say that those 4 issues are really pressing foreign policy and security issues for South Korea. Then how South Korea has been responding. But prior to that, I just highlight the Lee Jae-myung's foreign policy. Lee Jae-myung government has declared that it will pursue pragmatic foreign policy anchored in national interest. Okay, and what is meant by that? The goal is very clear. He argued that the realization of peace is a #1 national interest. Okay, and pursuing common prosperity is a #2 national interest, and also enhancing national prestige and dignity would be 3rd one. But for him, the most important priority is how to create peace on the Korean Peninsula. He argues very clearly that the ugly peace is better than winning war. That is a fundamental point. And he has been arguing that winning war is good, but winning without war is better. The best is to create circumstances in which there is no need for war. Therefore, conditions of peace, creation of conditions of peace that would not necessitate any conflict would be the best way to go. Therefore, that has been his fundamental principles. Okay, for in achieving those goals, he has set out several operational principles. First operational principle is called seek truth from facts. 事实就是 okay. This may sound like in the Chinese principle, but we Koreans call it 실사구시, 事实就是 okay. Seek truth from facts. That means what? Foreign policy, national security is all about the concrete reality. You do not pursue policy out of your ideology or value. You look at the reality, try to find the solutions from reality, and operate within that constraint. That is his first operational principle. Second principle is called, which he called, in Korean word is called 역지사지. 역지사지 means change, put yourself in others' shoes. What in Western term is called strategic empathy. Okay, therefore get out of strategic narcissism, cherishing strategic empathy. Try to understand from others' point of view, not from my point of view. Don't try to impose my criteria and my standard to others. Okay. Therefore, for example, during August 15, National Independence Day speech last year, he made it very clear that even in Singapore, he made that point too. That is what? I wanted to recognize North Korean regime as it is, not as we wish to see. Okay? And I do not have any intention to achieve unification by absorption. Okay? Not German model. Third, in doing that, I will not pursue any hostile policy on North Korea. He has been sending that message persistently to North Korea. But the first item, okay, I would like to recognize North Korean regime as it is, not as I wish to see. That's a very, very important operational principle. That means what? He doesn't have any intention of a regime change in North Korea. But North Korea still suspect, okay? And Kim Jong-un is not buying President Lee Jae-myung's point. Third important operational principle, I would say that honor common sense and reason. That is President Lee Jae-myung's third point. For example, we have some pro-North Korean sympathizers who refuse to accept the South Korean system. They have become more than 80 years old. They want to go back to North Korea. And then previous governments have been saying that, they are violating national security law, therefore we cannot send them back to North Korea. Lee Jae-myung's point, that what a nonsense. Okay? Follow common sense. If those over 90 years old people, they want to go back to their hometown, live in North Korea, let them go. That is simple common sense, right? And another good point, he's saying that South Korea has been divided and under the state of war more than 70 years. That is utterly nonsensical. Okay? Why can't we terminate the war, state of war? Okay? Why should we, allow the state of war continue up to 70 years? That is very simple common sense approach. Okay. And finally, I would say that his, the operational principle of foreign policy and national security is national consensus. He is well aware of divisiveness of Korean society. He knows how polarized Korean society is. But he's trying to come up with a national consensus. It will not be easy, okay? And because, both parties, ruling opposition party, they are capitalizing on divisiveness of Korean society to make it as a political capital for their survival and expansion, okay? But Lee Jae-myung made it very clear, okay, I wanted to transcend that one, okay? And therefore, he has been, even most recently, he has been appointing some very staunch conservative guys as a key post in the government, okay? And there is one gesture of achieving national consensus in Korea. Those are what it is my interpretation, it's not government explanation, okay? It is my interpretation of Lee Jae-myung government's pragmatic foreign policy, okay? Okay, then under the basis of this kind of pragmatic foreign policy, how he has been responding. It's obvious inter-Korean relations, for him his position is very clear, simple and clear. There is a reduced tension, build the confidence, try to transform existing armistice agreement system into some sort of peace regime, okay? In doing that, preventive diplomacy should be the guiding principle of South Korean foreign policy. Therefore, he's learning from ASEAN principle. ASEAN has been emphasizing preventive diplomacy, okay? That is, his approach to North Korean principle. Therefore, for example, he suspended the sending of propaganda leaflet balloons to North Korea, okay? And also he unilaterally suspended the broadcasting of loudspeakers along the front line, okay? And also he terminated all the hostile policy and gestures from the South Korean side, okay? And also recently, as you might have heard of it, at some Korean news, sent drones to North Korea 3 times. And then he instructed the national police to investigate it, and then they come up with the finding of investigation, and those youth committed unlawful act, and then he and the Minister of National Defense and the Minister of Unification all came up with, they came up with a factual report, and they apologized to North Korea, and committed that that kind of, things will not happen again. But this kind of behavior, invited very, reciprocal words and action from North Korea. Kim Yo-jong, sister of North Korean leader, come up with very nice, statement saying that that is acceptable, okay, and that's a good sign. But however, after 9th Party Congress, our Korea Workers' Party, Kim Jong-un again said that South Korea is a permanent enemy of DPRK, okay, and will continue to pursue confrontational policy with South Korea, Republic of Korea. But again, he is, pursuing, Lee Jae-myung has been pursuing that kind of policy. Therefore, it's not easy, because particularly during the period of Yoon Suk-yeol government, at the time, President Yoon Suk-yeol really wanted to overthrow North Korean regime, okay, through the extremely offensive policy. And then that is why North Korean leader came to conclusion that in South Korea, regardless of conservative or progressive government, South Korea is interested in overthrowing regime in North Korea and achieving unification by absorption. Okay, and therefore North Korea has that kind of stereotype with regard to South Korea. President Lee Jae-myung is trying to get rid of that kind of stereotype on the part of North Korea. I don't know to what extent it will be successful or not. And North Korean nuclear issue, it's a very tough issue because we do not have any leverage. If you have a nuclear weapons, then we can have a nuclear arms reduction talks and whatever with North Korea. Okay, we are not allowed to have a nuclear weapons. United States has the nuclear weapons. North Korea regarding the United States is the only legitimate negotiation, counterpart. Okay, but the President Lee Jae-myung made it very clear. I want to be a pacemaker. Let President Trump be a peacemaker. We will assist you. Therefore, President Trump, you got to have a summit talk with Kim Jong-un, okay? And in that process, we wanted to get some trickle-down effect on peace on the Korean Peninsula. That is President Lee Jae-myung's very, very humble approach, okay? There has been some criticism from South Korea. How can South Korea become pacemaker while President Trump becomes a peacemaker? However, President Lee Jae-myung's position is very clear. So what? Okay, as long as we can bring peace on the Korean Peninsula, as long as we can prevent the deepening of North Korean nuclear armament, okay, that will be good for us. Therefore, extremely in the pragmatic approach. Okay. Now, President Lee Jae-myung is hoping that when and if President Trump visits Beijing on March 31st, I don't know what that will realize or not. The White House announced that he will be visiting Beijing from March 1st to April 2nd. But if that happens, we are hoping that on the way back to Washington, President Trump, drops in Pyongyang and have a summit talk with Kim Jong-un. If that comes reality, then there might be a good chance. Okay, but given what is going on in Iran, we are not very sure that North Korea will accommodate proposal or not. But we are hoping it. But President Lee Jae-myung has been pursuing very realistic policy. Okay, up to now, President Yoon Suk-yeol, our government position is very clear: denuclearization first. Then, of course, President Moon Jae-in has been arguing the simultaneous pursuit of denuclearization of North Korea and peace regime creation on the Korean Peninsula, okay, simultaneous pursuit. But South Korean position has been denuclearization at the entrance of any dialogue and negotiation. Okay. But North Korea has been saying that no. North Korean constitution says that the nuclear weapons is valued protector of DPRK. And even during the 9th Party Congress, Chairman Kim Jong-un stated again that nuclear weapons is the most valuable defense of the DPRK. And also he said that, yes, we are willing to talk with the United States. But if United States does not raise the issue of denuclearization, we are willing to talk with you. Okay? And the White House also responded in kind, saying that, okay, we are willing to meet you without any precondition. But the DPRK raised the precondition. That is what you never mentioned about denuclearization. But the U.S. would include denuclearization in the agenda. There should be fine-tuning of agenda between Pyongyang and Washington. But anyhow, we are hoping it. But the President Jae-Myung made it very clear. His approach is incremental, three-step approach. Freezing first, freezing of nuclear and missile activities. And second stage is reduction of nuclear and missile arsenals. And the long-term creation of the Korean Peninsula without nukes. He even avoided using the term denuclearization. Okay? Strategic emphasis matters here. Okay? Therefore, freezing, reduction, and creation of the Korean Peninsula without nukes in the long term. Then there has been some criticism. Then, President Lee, then are you recognizing North Korea as a nuclear weapon state? What you're saying is we should get into nuclear arms reduction talk with North Korea. Of course, South Korean government will never mention nuclear arms reduction talk. But I think this, the Jae-Myung government will stick to the idea of incremental approach involving freezing, reduction, and ultimately Korean Peninsula without nukes. Okay? Of course, he will have two different audiences. Okay? When our government talks about the people in the South and its allies, our government will emphasize ultimate denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But our government will be telling North Korea, okay, denuclearization is not on the agenda. Now, just freezing and suspension and the reduction your arms and nuclear in the arsenal. Okay? And also our government is now working on, what should be terms of exchange between the US and DPRK. Okay, if North Korea freeze its nuclear and missile activities, what kinds of incentives should the US come up with? How about reductions? Okay, but if denuclearization is placed not the entrance, but at exit, then American incentives should be very, very innovative and inflective. Therefore, US should come up with like diplomatic normalization, okay, lifting of sanctions against North Korea, okay, or allowing North Korean in a pursuit of peaceful use of nuclear energy, okay, and massive economic and tourist investment in North Korea. Those kinds of really, transformative proposal may enable nuclear negotiation talk alive. Well, I do not know, but still, if President Trump visits Beijing, and we are hoping that there would be follow-up in a summit between Kim Jong-un and Trump in Pyongyang or in Beijing. Okay? But okay, if President Trump misses the chance, then there's another opportunity. Late October, there will be APEC meeting in Shenzhen, and therefore Shenzhen would be another chance. Okay? But again, North Korea will be extremely sensitive to and attentive to what is happening in Ukraine and Iran. Okay? But given what is going on in Iran, I've become rather pessimistic on the prospect for any kinds of summit talks between President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un. Okay, your alliance issue is very straightforward. President Lee Jae-Myung said that, okay, we'll increase our defense burden to 3.5% of our GDP within 3 years time period. Right now, we are spending about 2.69%, but within 3 years, we'll be increasing to 3.5%. That's why President Trump was very happy. And Aldrich Colby was saying that the Republic of Korea is a model example of alliance burden sharing when he gave a talk at the Munich Security Conference. Okay. And defense co-sharing, our government came up with saying that, okay, we'll come up with $33 billion, okay, in 10 years time period, okay. But that is almost equal to what President Trump wants, meaning $10 billion per year. But that will include all the cost. We are allowing the United States to use free of charge, the Pyeongtaek land base free of charge. Okay, we can include the cost that one, and we are giving tax exemption to the American forces in South Korea that included, and all the utility fees are free and whatever. But if those are all included, okay, without paying any extra money, we can come up with a $10 billion requirement of President Trump. And I think that is our calculation. I don't know to what extent the Trump administration willing to accommodate it, but that will be in a debate. But in return for our increasing burden sharing, and our government has been made very clear, okay, we want to pursue more strategic autonomy. We wanted to get back wartime operational control from the U.S. Right now, during the wartime, if defense condition, DEFCON goes up to 3 level, then operational control automatically goes to the American commander, who is the commander of Combined Forces Command. Okay? Then all South Korean forces, we have about 500,000 forces, they will be under the operational control of American forces, which has about 24,000 forces in South Korea. And we want to get it back. Okay? If we are going to be a main fighting force, then we should have operational control, right? It's a common sense. And I think the U.S. is willing to give to us, but some hardliners, like field commanders, U.S. field commanders, okay, and some hardline conservatives in South Korea strongly oppose that idea. But that will be another, big change, okay? And also our government position is very clear. Okay, we'll defend, we'll be the main fighting force for the defense of the Republic of Korea. But we do not have certain capabilities, such as nuclear capability. The United States should provide us with nuclear capability within the frame of extended nuclear deterrence. Okay? And also we are lacking some command and control, intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance asset. Okay? We want American support, what they're called bridging capabilities. Okay? U.S. is willing to do that. That is why if you read the National Defense Strategy, U.S. made it very clear. Okay, let American allies and partners defend themselves. However, U.S. will be providing critical but limited support. Okay, and therefore, that is what we want, and that is why the Pentagon is very happy about our government position. But as for the strategic flexibility, our government is saying no, because they can enhance strategic uncertainty on the Korean Peninsula. They can send the wrong signal to North Korea. And as to the issue of South Korean formal commitment to military support in Taiwan and South China Sea, our government is saying, no, we cannot do that. They can send the wrong signal to Pyongyang as well as Beijing. Okay? It's quite natural for Beijing to create the two theaters, okay, to divert American force structure from South China Sea and Taiwan Strait onto the Korean Peninsula. And also, North Korea has shown historical pattern of taking advantage of that kind of power vacuum in South Korea. Therefore, our government will be very, very sensitive to the idea of South Korea coming up with a formal commitment. United States is not happy about it. Even LG Colby showed that kind of uneasiness. However, that's a reality for South Korea, because President Lee Jae-Myung wants, tension reduction on the Korean Peninsula. He wants to eliminate all the potential for conflict escalation on the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, those two elements, strategic flexibility as well as South Korea's formal commitment to the military support in the case of contingencies in Taiwan Strait and South China Sea, will enhance strategic uncertainty in South Korea. See, I spent more than 30 minutes. Okay. I will try to wrap up quickly. Okay, and China-U.S., there is an ongoing debate in South Korea. The conservative and conservative mainstream argue that what is best for South Korea is to pursue pro-American balancing strategy, take sides with hegemon to suppress rise of challenger. Okay, but very small segments of South Korean historians argue that the bandwagoning China could be better for South Korea. And they take example from historical past. Okay? And when Ho-Jin was rising and Ming Dynasty was declining, at a time the Joseon Dynasty made the wrong choice. They took sides with declining Ming Dynasty, and we were invited by the Qing Dynasty. And our monarch, our king, went through the really humiliating experience with Hong Taiji, the second son of the founder of Qing Dynasty. Therefore, a lot of historians argue that you got to read the historical inflection point very wisely. If you bet on the declining hegemon, okay, and ignoring rising challenger, then you can screw up your national destiny. Okay, but it's very minority view. But we have such a kind of view too. Third view is we got to stand alone. Okay, either pursuing nuclear armament or pursuing permanent neutrality. Again, the supporters of this line of reasoning is very, very limited. But most popular, over more than 70% of South Koreans would support the idea of double hatching, okay, or muddling through, the continuation of status quo through muddling through. Okay, maintain alliance with the United States while strengthening strategic cooperative partnership with China. We need both China and the U.S. Okay, that is what President Kim Dae-jung has done. That is what Roh Moo-hyun has done. Therefore, we should continue the tradition. But obviously, given the nature of confrontation between Washington and Beijing, that kinds of double hatching may not work out. Therefore, it is not easy choice. However, majority of Korean people, want that kind of strategic choice. Finally, some scholars, including myself, have been proposing that we need to pursue transcending diplomacy. Okay, we can come up with a coalition of middle power. Okay, and then we can come up with a collective action to persuade China and the United States to avoid confrontational course and restore multilateralism and then foster open regionalism. Okay, but it cannot be the so-called the main strategy. It should be combined with muddling through strategy or double hatching strategy. The debate is going on, but President Lee Jae-myung's position is very clear. We'll go with both U.S. and China, period. Okay, and previous government, Yoon Suk-yeol government, gave more emphasis on the United States. Okay, and the relation with China was very much damaged. But now Lee Jae-myung is trying to restore the damaged relations with China. Okay. I don't know to what extent it will be successful or not, but that's reality. Then in conclusion, I think President Lee Jae-myung has been pursuing very bold diplomatic initiatives, and I think that his pragmatic foreign policy is very well taken, and I hope it would work out. But challenges at home and abroad are quite formidable. Okay, and the United States is not the United States we used to know. Chinese status has also changed immensely. Therefore, North Korean hostility getting deeper and deeper. Okay, and Russia can be another wild card that can negatively affect the overall security situation on the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, external environment is not that favorable. And internally, even though Democratic Party of Korea has a majority seat in the National Assembly, Korea is still divided. Particularly nowadays, youth in 20s, particularly male youth in the 20s, getting more conservative. Okay, they are lining up with MAGA kinds of value orientation. And then I think they can be troublesome too. Therefore, we have elements of uncertainty in the future. But I think that Lee Jae-myung is just smart enough to handle those kinds of things. By way of conclusion, I would say that Lee Jae-myung, I know Lee Jae-myung personally. He's a very, very smart person. And also he does not delegate foreign policy making decisions. He handles by himself. He knows how to allow competition among different bureaucratic agencies. But choice is being made by him. And he's extremely well informed. If you go back to Joseph Nye's idea of a contextualized intelligence, Lee Jae-myung is the kind of person who has that contextualized intelligence. Therefore, you can count on Lee Jae-myung. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that insightful look into Korea's strategic challenges, as well as your assessment of President Lee's pragmatic foreign policy. So my apologies, I realized that in my eagerness to introduce Professor Moon earlier, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Sarah Teo. I'm an assistant professor at RSIS, and I also coordinate the PhD program. All right, so now we'll move into Q&A. If you have a question or comment, please raise your hand, and I believe a microphone will come to you. Do introduce yourself briefly with your name and your affiliation, and do keep your questions or comments concise. Do we have a first question? Yes, Dr. Lam, please.
Thank you, Professor Moon, for that very candid and inspiring presentation. I would like to thank RSIS for making this seminar possible. My first question is, do you think Singapore and the ASEAN member states have any role to play in the future of the Korean Peninsula, on peace, development, and so on? Because there's one view in Southeast Asia that ASEAN is in Southeast Asia, Korean Peninsula is in Northeast Asia. In Southeast Asia, we have our own problems. We are basically spectators. We can pray for peace and so on, but it's just way beyond us, Although there's the, ASEAN land multilateralism, ASEAN +3, ARF, and so on and so forth. There's another view, perhaps a minority view, that peace is indivisible. Although like East Asian community, all these are too idealistic and so on, but if we can play a role, we like to play a role. So may I humbly ask you, in your personal opinion, what can Singapore and the other 10 ASEAN countries do in any practical ways, So my second and last question, if the chair is indulgent enough, may I ask, what do you think is the impact of the two major wars, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the US-Israeli attack against Iran. What is the impact of these wars on the future of the Korean Peninsula and the Lee Jae-Myung government's pragmatic diplomacy? Thank you.
Shall I? Thank you, Professor Lam. And those two questions are very well taken. And we talk about East Asia and East Asian community, but we see very clear division between Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia. When the whole this China, Japan, Republic of Korea trilateral cooperation is a product of really East Asian summit, okay, which was held in Manila in 1997, 1998, when President Lee Jae-Myung met, Prime Minister Obuchi and the Chinese Prime Minister, and they decided to have some kinds of trilateral meeting, whatever. But look at the present status in Northeast Asia. China, Japan, South Korea trilateral cooperation secretary is not making any progress at all. Okay, but in the past, ASEAN was somewhat worried about the Northeast Asia and countries may promote cooperation among themselves. Therefore, they get away from the East Asia community or dominate of the East Asia by replacing ASEAN countries and whatever. But now, for the past 30 years, no progress in cooperation among Northeast Asian countries. Therefore, I think the ASEAN centrality still works. And they have to come back to ASEAN so that ASEAN can facilitate cooperation among three countries, particularly given the current Japan-China confrontation. Okay. South Korea is not in the position to mediate between the two. And the ASEAN countries, particularly Singapore, can play that role because you are very close to China and very close to Japan. Therefore, either under the rubric of ASEAN or your own initiative, you can promote some kinds of cooperation among countries in the north. Maybe Singapore and South Korea can work together, have that kind of format in Korea, and bring Chinese and Japanese scholars, policymakers, track 1, track 1.2, 1.5, track 2, and have a new kind of platform to discuss those kinds of issues. Therefore, I'm saying is that the ASEAN centrality has not been faded out. It's still there, given current the nature of current confrontation among countries in Northeast Asia. Asia still has a very important instrumental value, okay, in facilitating cooperation among themselves, thereby promoting the idea of East Asia community. And what is going on in Iran and Ukraine will have a very, very profound adverse impact on the Korean Peninsula, particularly on the North Korean behavior. Okay, and the North Korea was hoping that there would be peaceful resolution of Ukrainian issue and Iranian issue. But the Iranian issue ended up with war, American and Israeli invasion of Iran, and Ukraine, we do not see any exit in the Ukrainian entanglement. Under that situation, Kim Jong-un will be extremely cautious in coming out with any kind of diplomatic initiative. Therefore, leadership in North Korea will be calculating what's going on, and North Korea will be waiting. Okay, and of course here the key player is Trump. What kinds of message he would give before he goes to Beijing. Okay, but again, for example, when President Trump visited Gyeongju in late October last year, he just proposed, okay, we'll lift the sanctions on North Korea, come out dialogue, just 2 days before his arrival. North Korea doesn't have time to prepare. How can Kim Jong-un come out and meet President Trump? If President Trump sent that message to Pyongyang a month before his visit to South Korea, things could have been somewhat different. Therefore, now we have about 3 more weeks to go to the end of March. Okay, 3 or 4 weeks, and I hope that the Trump administration may reactivate its networks with Pyongyang and prepare thoroughly so that they can have a meaningful summit in Pyongyang. But I'm repeating, Ukraine and Iran, what's going on in Ukraine and Iran have been giving very, very negative impact on North Korean perception, thereby inter-Korean relations.
Could we get a second question? Yes, Louis?
Thank you, Professor Moon. My name is Louis Montesclaros with RSIS. My question is on the pragmatism or seeking truth from facts as an operational principle of President Lee Jae-Myung. How do you see this playing out in the long term? Should there be some form of reconciliation with the North, which is more ideology-driven? Thank you.
For me, I think it would be very, very difficult. But President Lee Jae-Myung has been very, very innovative, okay? And he is less afraid of domestic criticism of him being too mild than North Korea, okay? And however, that won't really move North Korean leadership. North Korean leadership's suspicion of South Korea is just so deep. And really, North Korean leader is really concerned about cultural penetration of South Korea, K-pop culture and whatever. It's not really propaganda on the part of South Korean government. That's real. His legitimacy relies on the North Korean news support. North Korean news are being fascinated by the South Korean, K-pop culture and etc. Therefore, if there is any meaningful interaction between the North and South, then North Korean news will be influenced by that change. Then that will have a profound impact on public support and legitimacy of North Korean leader. And I think that is one of the important factors. That is why he wanted to cut off any relations with South Korea. But nominally, is for the sake of national security and past history of hostile relations between two countries and whatever. But in my personal opinion, it might have something to do with potential impact on regime security in North Korea. If that being the case, then reconciliation through economic, cultural, political exchange between North and South Korea will be very, very difficult. But I may be wrong. Maybe Kim Jong-un is a very young leader, and he can change his mindset too. But as of now, I'm not very optimistic. But again, President Lee Jae-myung's approach, he's a very persistent person. Therefore, he will continue to send a message to Pyongyang that I want to have a good relations with you. I will not harm you. Okay, I will respect your regime identity and regime security. I think it may work. Okay, and therefore we should wait and see.
Let's take another question. Jae-Han.
Thank you very much, Professor Moon. My name is Jan Park. I teach at RSIS. I'm Sarah's colleague. Thank you for the very comprehensive lecture. I have a bazillion questions, but I'm just going to ask one. So you spoke of operational control transfer, wartime operational control. There are certain requirements like investing in additional ISR capabilities and so on and so forth. And there are a couple of other parts moving on the defense side. So for example, defense industry has been doing well in South Korea, so the government is trying to promote that. And then we have defense reforms going on, which are in part driven by technological developments, but also, as I understand it, defense reforms are driven by the fact that the demographic decline is going on. And to compensate for those kind of issues, the Korean military has been investing in air and naval capabilities, and it has to make additional investments in intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. And if these investments are made, there's a whole lot of literature developed on target balancing. That is to say, if a state acquires certain capabilities, other states will consider those as threats. So for example, if South Korea invests in naval and air capabilities, China and North Korea will see them as threats. So do you see any contradictions in autonomous self-defense and Korea's sort of attempt to sort of balance out U.S.-China relations, sort of like two different things going on? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a very well-taken question. There comes the Korean dilemma. Okay, the President Jae-Myung decided to acquire nuclear-powered submarines. Okay, and then there is a debate going on in South Korea. What's the use of these nuclear-powered submarines? Okay, we do not have a deep blue sea navy. Why the hell we should have it to support American, operations in the blue sea? It is not. Okay, and also, therefore, it's extremely difficult to come up with a so-called optimal level of self-defense. Okay, and therefore that will be ongoing debate. Okay, but therefore, on the one hand, we want the self-defense, self-reliant defense forces, less dependent on the United States. Then we'll be increasing our defense budget. We'll be acquiring more, weapons and military equipment. Then they can further widen the gap between the North and South Korea in conventional weapons. Then North Korea will counter by increasing asymmetric forces, including nuclear forces. Okay, then may push South Korea opt for the nuclear weapons if there is a doubt on the American provision of extended nuclear deterrence. There is a complicated one. Therefore, how to balance between optimal level of military spending on the Korean Peninsula, on the other hand, maintenance of alliance with the United States, whatever. Therefore, that will be ongoing. Even defense budget spending, same thing. For example, if nuclear-powered submarine, if you wanted to acquire one submarine, it will require about 4 trillion to 6 trillion won. That means what? Therefore, almost, 4 billion to 4 billion to 6 billion dollars, one. Okay. Then, to have a workable submarine unit, you got to have 4. 2 for deployment, 1 for training and education, 1 for repair and maintenance. Then, when you talk about 4 billion times 4 means what? $60 billion. Okay. Then that will account for almost 25 to 30% of South Korea total defense spending. Then how about voices from the Army and Air Force? Why they're investing hold on money into Navy? Therefore, it's now starting, but in the process of actual procurement of budget, okay, and there will be intense debate. I don't know whether I've given the correct answer to you or not, but whole point is this: yes, South Korea's pursuit of self-defense capability can create strategic uncertainty on the Korean Peninsula and in the region. The more South Korea push for the self-reliant defense forces, China, Japan, North Korea will be much more attentive, okay? And that will create another dimension of security dilemma on the Korean Peninsula in Northeast Asia. That is why we need a new security architecture in Northeast Asia, from existing pattern of collective defense system to collective security system, multilateral security cooperation regime. Okay? And a lot of people argue that the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe failed, but I don't think so. And particularly, we have never tried it. ASEAN has been trying to emulate in a CSCE, OSCE model, but did not work it out. But in the case of ASEAN, degree of arms racism less tense. But in Northeast Asia, we need that kind of security architecture. Therefore, for me, it is time for us to really to talk about, okay, security cooperation, common security, cooperative security, comprehensive security, so that we can come up with a new security architecture. Your point is very well taken, that that should be very interesting research topic for those who are interested in Korean in the Peninsula.
Okay, we'll take Jane first, and then Max, and then the gentleman at the back. The lady in front.
Professor Jane Chan from RSIS, thank you very much for your lecture. I'm very fascinated with just this last point that you've made, and also, your suggestion that there needs to be a coalition of middle powers. So, I'm just trying to perhaps, you can share with us in your mind what might be some of the concrete outcome that this collection of middle power is capable of delivering in managing, the four challenges that you've highlighted that, the ROK is facing right now. Because in my mind, at least if we focus on the issue of the Korean Peninsula, two main parties are not part of the system. I mean, the US, for one, don't believe in multilateralism anymore, and the PRK is not part of that. So, how would the middle powers be able to deliver what you have in mind, and what exactly do you have in mind in terms of, will it actually give ROK more strategic space in that sense? Thank you.
That's very good, comment and question. Since, in fact, I, wrote a piece in the journal called International Politics. It's a German, monthly magazine about the idea of a coalition of sandwich countries. At the Olaf Scholz was Chancellor of Germany, and then it was kind of an article that was trying to advise, Chancellor Olaf Scholz. But at the time, very few paid attention to the idea of a coalition of sandwiched countries between China and the United States. But when I wrote that piece, a lot of folks, in the European folks, raised a very similar question which you raised. But initially, I was thinking about the coalition of middle power, those countries which have alliance with the United States and the deeper economic cooperation with China. Therefore, I was thinking about South Korea, Japan, Australia, Canada, okay, Germany, France, okay, those kinds of countries and whatever. But in actual terms, it is very, very difficult to talk about the cooperation, even now. But for the time being, the whole this idea of coalition of middle power just was a dead idea. Then Mark Carney gave it that famous speech in Davos Forum, and also he cited from Alexander Stubb, President of Finland, who wrote a very interesting piece on value-based, realism in Foreign Affairs magazine. Okay, since then on, there is a recurrence of, middle power coalition idea. Therefore, nowadays, Indonesia, Malaysia, South Korea, and so many places, Australia, now organizing a lot of so-called Track 2, Track 1.5 conferences and workshops and how to form a middle power. But for me, it is extremely difficult to come up with a so-called middle power coalition. And the more I look into the issue, it should be issue-based coalition. Therefore, when I talk about those kinds of countries, like Korea, Japan, Australia, Canada, Germany, whatever, that kind of middle power, and the restoration of a multilateral order in trade and investment and finance, that would be the best way of forming coalition of middle powers. Okay, but AI, whatever, say like Singapore, South Korea, whatever, they can form the much smaller base of middle power coalition. Therefore, I wanted to suggest that that kinds of middle power coalition should be issue specific and goal specific. Otherwise, it will lead to nowhere. Okay, and so far we have been talking about very in vague terms and general terms, but no way we can go. Okay, for example, look, Mark Carney criticized U.S., but on the issue of American-Israeli invasion of Iran, he supported President Trump. then how can we talk about, Makani on broad issue of, foreign policy? Therefore, depending upon different issue areas, okay, the countries of the willing can sit together, develop the agenda, set the agenda, and, create international forum to advance their views. Therefore, it will be extremely difficult for us to come up with a so-called all-encompassing coalition of middle power. Okay, for example, Vienna Congress. Okay, we talk about concept of power, right? But at a time, very specific case, peace, Napoleonic War, and restoring peace was very important. Peace was the most important issue. If they could work on that one. Okay, likewise, depending upon what happened, and middle power countries should develop the specific issue areas through which they can pull together certain countries and set the agenda and try to turn the agenda into the actual actions.
Okay, we'll go next to Max, the gentleman in the second row.
Thank you so much, Professor Moon. I am a PhD candidate from Fudan University of China, and I'm so glad to be here to listening to your speech. I have a small question on Japan-Korea relation in President Lee Jae-Myung's era. So after he got on the stage, the shadow, it was like in President Young's era that the shadow diplomacy recovered, and when President Lee, he come to stage, not like the formal governments of progressive parties, the shadow diplomacy didn't end, and it seems like the bilateral relation between Japan and South Korea continued to be very well. So I would like to know your perspective on the recovering of Japan-South Korea relation within a progressive party government in South Korea. Thank you so much.
Yeah, in fact, I was interviewed by the Japanese TBS, the Tokyo Broadcasting System. In fact, the anchor asked me the question saying that President Lee Jae-Myung shows very different view, attitude. When he was the leader of opposition party during the Yoon Suk-yeol government, he was extremely critical of Japanese government. But now he has a complete different view. And he's willing to talk with Prime Minister Takaichi and the ruling Liberal Democratic Party and etc. My answer was very simple and straightforward. Very simple. At the time, he was a leader of an opposition party. Therefore, he got to criticize Japanese government. Now he's the president of Republic of Korea. He should reflect the broad view of Korean people. He's representing Republic of Korea. Therefore, his view as a president cannot be same as his view as a leader of opposition party. And I think if you analyze Lee Jae-Myung's behavior vis-a-vis Prime Minister Takaichi, that really reflects, that is the epitome of his national interest-based pragmatic foreign policy. But here, you got to understand one thing. Takaichi-san had also shown different behavior from Abe-san, because President Moon Jae-in was a counter of Prime Minister Abe in 2017 and 18, and I was advisor to President Moon Jae-in. Whenever he had altogether, President Moon had 11 times telephone call with Prime Minister Abe. He was not happy after his call with Prime Minister Abe, because I was there about 2 times. I was next to him when he made a phone call. Because President Moon Jae-in's approach is very simple. Japan is so important for us, economic cooperation and security cooperation. Okay? Therefore, we should pursue 2-track approach. Let us deal with the history issue. At the same time, let us talk about security and economic cooperation. And also, President Moon Jae-in's view is very straightforward. He looked at the situation from the viewpoints of the victims. Therefore, if you look at the comfort woman issue, forced labor workers issue, whatever, from victims' point of view, it's not easy to solve the problem. And also, South Korean people have a collective memory of Japanese colonial period. Even president cannot force them to change it. Therefore, it takes time. Therefore, while we promote cooperation in security and economic arenas, as for history and cultural issues, let us take a time, let us be patient. But the Prime Minister Abe's position is different. No, unless you solve that problem, unless you implement the Comfort Women Agreement, unless you stopped the cash payment of forced labor workers' compensation, reparation, there is no talk for security cooperation and economic cooperation. Therefore, I would say that the Moon Jae-in position and Lee Jae-myung positions are same, identical. Japanese responses are different. But Takaichi-san's position is, I don't know. Up to now, she has been very, very prudent and careful. Okay? But now let us see in August whether she visits the Yasukuni Shrine or not. Okay? But on the issue of Shimane Prefecture's celebration of Takeshima Day, she was very, very prudent. Okay? She didn't send any cabinet level minister. Instead, she sent, vice minister, deputy, minister level person, and etc. But let us wait and see. But in the case of Prime Minister Abe, he was very clear. Unless you solve comfort woman issue and forced labor workers issue, there is no way for us to talk about security and economic cooperation. That is why President Moon Jae-in was so angry about Prime Minister Abe. But Prime Minister Takaichi has been very, very receptive to President Lee Jae-myung's proposal. But it's just the beginning. Let us wait and see.
And the gentleman in the back.
Professor Moon, hi. My name is Victor Teo. I'm currently visiting fellow at the East Asian Institute at the National University of Singapore. So I have three questions. Well, first, on the question of Korea-Japan relations, do you, now that the Chinese have put sanctions on Japan, on the rare earths, do you think that there will be collaboration between the Korean defense companies, like Hanwha, and the Japanese defense companies going forward? That's the first question. Second question is, what do you make of the succession issue in North Korea? Because right now the press is having all these pictures of Kim Jong-un bringing his daughter all around to the different sites, and they're talking about the daughter being a potential successor to Kim. So I was wondering, what is your take on this? My third question has to do with the current Korean president's take on Russian relations. So does he have any new initiative in terms of South Korea-Russian relations? Thank you.
Can you repeat the first question again?
Oh, I'm interested to know your thoughts on how the South Koreans would cooperate with Japan going forward, especially in terms of defense industry, because you both countries are allies of the United States, and now Japan has come under sanctions by the Chinese. Do you see closer cooperation between South Korea and Japan in terms of the defense industries?
It will not be easy, okay? And we have been cooperating with Japan through the angle of the United States in all areas, okay? Maybe, if President Lee Jae-myung makes a good relations with the Prime Minister Takaichi, they may select some model case for the bilateral cooperation in defense industrial sector, but they will be much more cautious on that one. Okay, and also if you look at the defense industrial structure in Japan and South Korea, they are rather competitive than complementary. Therefore, it will not be easy. Shipbuilding and other areas too. Okay, therefore, it's yet to be seen. But there could be some, we rely on Japan for parts and components, on various goods. Therefore, there could be, South Korea cannot avoid, cooperation with Japanese firms. However, explicit defense industrial cooperation could be very, very sensitive. Okay, but let us wait and see. And succession in North Korea, and Kim Jong-un is a young guy. Okay, it's too early to talk about succession. Okay, In South Korea, there's some North Korean specialists who say that at the age of 12, Kim Jong-il become de facto successor to Kim Jong-un and whatever. No, I don't buy that argument. No. Why Kim Jong-un is taking care of Kim Jong-il and showing her into public appearance and whatever? Very simple. From the days since 2012, okay, when Kim Jong-un become de facto successor in Kim Jong-il, and his target was North Korean youth. He's young, therefore his future political support base should come from the youth. Okay? And also his grandfather, his father were not really family-oriented in a leader. Okay? And there were scandals and whatever. But Kim Jong-un wanted to show the family image very strongly, and the leader who is taking care of family and youth. And within that context, he might have been showing Kim Jong-il to the public in a setting. And also, it's just too dangerous to talk about succession in North Korea. Okay? You never talk about succession in North Korea and North Koreans. Okay? It's just so sensitive. But the Japanese newspaper and the South Korean newspaper, they love articles on succession in North Korea. Okay? Therefore, I don't buy that argument. And our National Intelligence Service come up with that report, even though Lee Jong-suk, its head, he's the supreme North Korean specialist. But he had it too, because members of National Assembly are interested in knowing either Kim Jong-il is going to be his successor or not. But still, we're talking about 38 years old North Korean leader talking about succession. That is kind of taboo in North Korea. Okay? South Korea, Russia is very precarious. And 2 years ago, I was invited by the Russian Foreign Ministry, and I met this very influential guys in Russian Foreign Ministry, and they were telling me very interesting story. Okay, we all know South Korea is unfriendly nation. But South Korea is the most friendly among unfriendly nations. Therefore, we want to have a good relations with South Korea. Okay, but there's a condition, most important condition: don't provide Ukraine with lethal weapons. If that being the case, our relations will be gone. And then don't worry about our relations with the DPRK. Okay, and don't try to disrupt our normalization with the DPRK. Okay. Because DPRK is supporting us, we should reciprocate, okay? But will not provide North Korea with the critical military technologies that can undermine South Korean security. Because we value the return of economic cooperation with South Korea so highly. Therefore, we will not jeopardize our ties with South Korea. Therefore, Russian calculation is also very, very complicated. Okay? But Russia does not want to lose South Korea. Russia wants South Korea reopen its Samsung factory, Hyundai Motors plant, LG chemistry plant, as soon as possible. Okay? Therefore, it's much more complicated.
All right, I think with that, we have most likely come to the end of today's very engaging seminar. I want to express my appreciation to Prof. Moon for sharing his insights, and to everyone here for being here and also for your participation. So thank you, everyone, and we look forward to welcoming you at future RSIS events. Thank you.
Thank you.